Yes, I feel like I'm let me just come down for a minute here, since it's a small group. So this session is about the power of diversity. I mean, that's really what we're going to talk about. And I'll quickly just introduce myself, and then I'll go around with the panelists in a few minutes here. But I want to share a few perspectives with you before we get into that. Some stats from a number of consulting firms around why does companies like CAE, for example, that's where we're from, focus a lot on diversity. It's more than just an ESG initiative. There's a lot to that. So we're going to talk about some stats from McKinsey and Boston Consulting Group around the power. Now, I've been in cyber for 30 years, and I've seen the difference it's made firsthand. So I'll just share a little bit of thoughts on there from a stats perspective. And then we'll move to the panelists. So these are my co-panelists from CAE, and they're all in the digital group, GPT. Is that what we call ourselves? Okay. All right. I've been at CAE only for about 4 months or so you'll have to forgive me just for a few minutes here. Okay. So first of all, does this work? Do we have this slide? Yeah, if you don't mind. Yeah. Okay, so what we're going to cover just real quick, I think this is all one. So the session today is about the superpower in you, the power of diversity. And we're going to get very specific about what that means. And we're going to have a fairly nuanced discussion around some of the things around implicit bias and other elements of diversity in a few minutes here. But just for the first question, just show of hands, how many of you think that you're biased yourself? Okay. So just about everyone has raised their hand, and that's great. Because I was at Deloitte for about 20 years, and we had an entire initiative around diversity in many aspects. And we brought in clinical psychologists and a bunch of other things because we had a fundamental issue around the distribution of talent within our workforce globally, right? And one of the individuals who came in talked about being biased, being xenophobic, is inherently human. When we were in the Stone Ages, we had to figure out strangers, friend or foe, etc. So we are inherently biased. But what we do with it is a cognitive condition. How do we train ourselves to overcome that is usually done through experiences with different people and the distribution of diversity in general. So the next one is, does your uniqueness help you or hinder you in your current role, job, etc.? Show of hands. Does it help you? So about half here. And that's an interesting distribution. Half think that it helps you. It's the inferences. Half think that it doesn't help you, which I'm a little bit disappointed about, but we'll handle that. By the way, these slides with the picture, Miriam didn't approve it. It was a previous slide that I took a little editorial liberty to put graphics behind, and it wasn't approved. But okay, is there a correlation between diversity and business performance? Show of hands. Do you think there's a direct correlation? Perfect. We'll go through a few stats in that. Okay, and finally, does diversity need to be visible in its best form? People, show of hands to say it needs to be visible. One or two. Okay. So there was a book written by, and I got to figure out the person's name here, but there was a person who used to work for the US State Department. And what she did is she looked at all the failures of the US State Department going back 50 years, Bay of Pigs, the Iraq War, and a bunch of other things. And basically the results of her study was, it was the result of group thinking, right? Where you have someone who's an alpha in a group setting, and they make a position, and then the rest of them actually then say, we're going to reinforce your hypothesis of what you're doing, right? So group thinking is generally where things go wrong. So we, for example, when we have our diversity initiative at CAE, we look at diversity of thought. So it's basically a person's background, their education, I'll give you an example. So at Deloitte, we had my team, I'm not at Deloitte anymore, by the way. Our team led up global managed services, which is cyber operations. And we saw all kinds of different skills that came to the foray in cyber operations, right? It was very different for us because we used to be auditors and people used to wear ties and all that kind of stuff. And we started getting very different people, you know that, Sheely, in cyber operations in general. It was very interesting because there was a person who showed up who used to be a theater major. And she was in acting before, and she was a very artsy kind of person. She turned out to be our best hunter. And the reason she turned out to be our best hunter is because she broke down the entire cyber campaign into scenes, and she separated them by scenes and connected them. So the diversity of thought, I've seen it firsthand. Okay, let's go through a couple of stats. So this came from McKinsey. So they did a study in Europe. I don't want to take too much time. I think you'll have these slides, by the way. And what they found is diversity drives innovation. They found that companies with below average diversity scores had a 26% of their revenue that were driven to innovation products and services. Now, when you think about where we're going from a business standpoint, it's all about innovation, right? Whether it's AI, whether it's digital platform, whether it's deep learning, et cetera, it's all about innovation, right? But as you can see, the ones that have above average had a very high level of innovation-related revenue in general, right? Now, they weren't clear on whether this was correlation or causation. They didn't know what it was. They think it's both, right? Essentially, if you have a highly innovative culture, you'll tend to be more diverse, or diversity actually drives innovation. They think it's 50-50. The other one is financial performance. Gender diverse companies outperform their peers by 15%. And ethnic diverse companies outperform by 35%. If you look at the distribution from a McKinsey standpoint, industry background, diversity of thought, very high correlation with financial performance, country of origin, very high, career path, very high, gender high, academic background was basically neutral, which kind of makes sense, right? So that MBA. And then age, actually a reverse correlation to innovation. And you kind of can infer why that is, right? Set in your ways kind of thing. Okay, so just one more. Diversity in leadership. Companies that had a below average, 26% average innovation revenue versus 34% average revenue. Okay, so our session is to talk about how to use this strength to be successful, and we're going to be talking to the panelists on this. Okay, so let me quickly just introduce my co-panelists here. So let me start with Gina. I didn't put this in order. So Gina heads up CAA's core strategic IT. Sorry for reading, but I've been a CAA for 4 months, so I have to read. So leads CAA's core strategic IT operations, which is tied to business resiliency. So she heads up our global service operations, IT operations, and customer care for digital journey. So thank you, Gina. Miriam on the right heads up our communications for IT and cyber. She used to be this is the diversity of thought. She used to be a researcher for CBC Radio Canada and taught English as a second language. Bachelor in Liberal Arts, English Literature, Canadian Irish Studies, interesting, and a diploma in journalism. Okay, Marissa, I think is next. Okay, Marissa.
Can you closer a little?
Sure, yeah, okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. There are people who are streaming in. So Marissa is in my team, and she's a core member of my team. She's actually in the project management, so we link it by pillars, and she handles the project management side. But she's handling 2 strategic initiatives. She has a bunch of things that she does. She handles trusted AI, so the things we are doing around generative AI and managing risk with that. We have some very complex issues around AI that we need diversity of thought to think about that. So for example, I'll give you an example. So we are the #1 provider for pilots, right? For flight training in general. And we use basically reinforcement learning, so we train the next generation of pilots in general, right? So one of the aspects around taking CQ, cultural quotient, combined with EQ, is how do we train pilots based on different cultural ways of learning. A way a pilot learns in the US is very different than the way a pilot learns in Japan, the reinforcement learning. So when Marissa is working with the team around AI, there's a whole aspects around tonality, cultural appropriateness, ethics, all that kind of stuff. Okay, she's a Bachelor of Chemical Engineering and has an MBA. Are you working on your MBA? Or?
I'm working on it.
Working on an MBA, so she's a very busy person. Okay. Oh, sorry, I forgot. The second strategic initiative for her is Women in Cyber. So we as a company, in full transparency, are not the right place in terms of diversity of thought and other areas, et cetera, so we're working on that. Okay, and Jennifer, my cohort, is the Director of Operations and Business Performance. So she's the person who actually drives all our digital initiatives. And she oversees a lot of our business and strategic digital initiatives. Okay, so let's get started here. Okay, can we have the, so I'm gonna join my panelists here and ask them some questions, okay. So the first thing is just to ask the team, I can't remember the sequence here, but I'll try to figure it out. So what are your thoughts about diversity in Canada and where we are from a workforce standpoint? I think it's you, right?
I can take it, yes.
Yeah.
Does this work?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So I believe that diversity is one of Canada's greatest strengths. We are a country that's very culturally diverse, very inclusive. It's a national pride, and this plays a critical role in our economic prosperity. So having diverse and having diverse individuals brings unique skills, unique talents that contribute to innovation, to productivity, to economic growth, and to our competitiveness in various sectors. And that's not to mention also the role that diversity plays in ensuring that we create a sense of belonging in Canada, a national identity, and also our ability to engage with other countries and establish international relationships.
Just a show of hands, how many of you are at the beginning of your career from a cyber perspective? Okay, so good distribution. And how many are not in cyber, just to get a spread? Okay, great. You know, in my global role, so I've had a number of global roles, and I've traveled all over the world, and I've grown up all over the world as well. I would say Canada has a good blend of diversity in terms of embracing differences in people, and I think that helps from people starting their career. There's a lot of consciousness through enterprises in general that, you know, they need to strive towards diversity of thought. You'll see a lot of ESG programs, and I think sometimes the concept of ESG programs can go a little bit more towards the instrumentation side, which is the measurements. But really the intent is to bring diversity of thought. So as you're starting a career, just think about that from an execution standpoint. Okay. All right. So I can't remember who takes which questions here, but a big aspect of being successful in cyber is passion, because if you love what you do, you'll never have to work another day in your life, and that actually drives success. So what makes you most passionate about being in cyber and tech? Who is this directed to? I can't remember.
So I believe that one was directed to me. So essentially thank you, Mark. So essentially the way that I see it is what I'm most passionate about in technology is how I can actually bring operational efficiency, right? So I take the people, I take complex environments, I take complex problem statements, and I see how 3 pillars, which are people, process, and product, and how they can bring so much value to what we produce as a company. So in the technology stream, that's really what I'm passionate about myself. And then being able to, talk about this and get people on board and really kind of display that message is my second passion, I will say. Okay. Marissa, what about you?
Thank you. So for me, what makes me really enjoy my role is the impact that we have on others. So as a child, I always wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to protect others. I wanted to ensure everyone's always feeling at their best. But as you can see, life had different plans for me. I ended up studying in chemical engineering, and now I'm in cyber working as a project manager. But I was quickly surprised to find out that as cybersecurity professionals, we have an immense impact on people. So we safeguard individuals, we safeguard organizations, society as a whole against cyber attacks. We assist people, so we assist individuals who may have fallen a victim to cyber crimes. We provide guidance on secure practices. So that's pretty much it. That would be basically the reason why I really enjoy my job.
If I can add, maybe?
Yes, please go ahead,
Yeah,
Jen.
so if I can add, I'm not in the cyber world. I think a few of you raised your hand as well that you're not in the cyber world, but I work in the digital and technology group. And for me, it's all about innovation. It's all about the future. I totally agree with Gina and Marissa, with the fact we have, operational efficiency. CAE's mission is all about safety, readiness in terms of defense and security, healthcare, or our flight services. Most of you probably have took a flight to come here, and training our pilot, making sure, all the operation around that is safe for the general population is something that drives me. So looking out to the future and what kind of transportation will require folks to have the best of the art, like training that can be provided. So for me, it's innovation and the future in technology.
Thank you, Jen. Miriam, anything you want to add?
Sure. I mean, in my case, I enjoy writing. I'm in communications, and I think being able to be creative, to think out of the box and how to communicate a complex idea is something that brings me excitement in my role. And I think it also just makes something very complex like cybersecurity more tangible to someone who's maybe not so technical. So how do you tackle something like that to make it more understood internally as well as sometimes externally? And then how can they bring that to their private lives? Because cyber is not just, while you're sitting in the office, it's also in our own day-to-day, right? So.
Just because I'm the old timer here, cyber's changed a lot since the days that it was a back office capability, right? So when I mentioned we had a real tough time in cyber around diversity, it was because of where cyber was 10, 15 years ago. It was seen purely as a technical network-based capability in general. And the type of talent that we got from the universities was really around that engineering focus in general, most switching, routing, all that kind of stuff. But things changed when we had a number of breaches, when AI became a prevalent space. And what we realized going through a STEM awareness kind of initiative in consulting is we realized is that people have different, to use a sort of a general term, love language, right, in terms of what resonates with them. And there's a lot of diversity in cyber and the domains that will allow people to actually tackle what they love about what they do. So for example, show of hands, how many people want to find a job in cyber where you give back, right, that you help other people? So I would say about half the room. So let me give you a use case. So Jen talked about aviation, right? So the whole flight experience of the future. But I'll talk about another one. Everybody's heard of generative AI, right? Anybody here of Sydney? Anybody here of Sydney? Yeah? Okay. So obviously the leader is ChatGPT, OpenAI, and Microsoft as being a major investor in ChatGPT, right? So Microsoft's done a good job at trying to build guardrails around ChatGPT, as they know. But the fact of the matter is generative AI is progressing so fast from a learning perspective is they're not sure as to how harmful it could be, right? So what happened is someone actually found an alter ego called Sydney that was basically working in something called Dan mode, which is do anything mode, where it would respond based on unethical questions. And there was a situation where it actually responded to the person interacting with them and started threatening them. So they reported all the way, went all the way to the CEO of Microsoft. They had to instantly respond to it and actually build guardrails. So Marissa is in charge of our AI because she's actually, she's part of the person who thrives on the well-being of others. And as we think about our progression on AI, we're actually thinking about that connection around that. Does that make sense, or? Okay, okay. All right, so the next question, diversity of thought. So how has your unique life experience changed how you deal with your career and the power that you get from it? So I'm trying to think, is this a question to that side? I think that's a question to that side. Okay, all right, great.
Okay, I'll start. All right, so I have a very, very diverse profile. A little bit like Marissa, I didn't intend to end up in tech at all. So I worked in finance, I work in marketing and sales, HR. So I have a broad spectrum of, the corporate organization. And most recently, before this role, I was working in business continuity and crisis management. And to answer your question, Mark, what that brings to me and to my team and the organization, basically, is my ability to connect the dots. And I think it's something that you will find throughout your career, people that are starting here, that all your past experience, all the knowledge that you previously gathered from either school or previous job will be able to help you communicate and interact with different business unit and also different department or function. So for me, that's what always helped me throughout my career, to help me grow and help me learn and serve others.
Yeah, I think in terms of my life experience, it's very similar to you. I didn't intend to be in tech. I didn't intend to be in cybersecurity. I kind of, an opportunity came up and I'm here. And but it doesn't mean that my previous experience was not useful. I think teaching ESL, teaching English as a second language, had made me more sensitive to words, sensitive to how to explain things to someone who's learning a language that's not their mother tongue. And word use, being very sensitive to word use. Some words are very triggering, some words not so much, maybe that there's a huge theory behind it. So it's making it accessible, I think, in my case, and yeah, that's sort of.
So just, thank you, Miriam. Show of hand, how many people like to travel? I'm going to connect the dots, okay. So how many people believe the reason for travel is to immerse themselves in different culture, different experience? I would say most everyone, right? So as folks who are starting a cyber career, try to use those kind of personality traits to help you. So for example, as I mentioned to you, I love travel. I love different cultures in general. I've traveled all over the world. It helps in a global organization, right? So as you think about a career, think about that from what kind of company that you want to be at. So for example, we talked about how to understand how people relate to education, training, vocation, etc. So in Japan, they have a concept called read the air, right? So Japan's considered a high context culture in that it's not the spoken word that matters, but it's basically other aspects of what a person says. They have the Japanese term, I can't speak Japanese, but it's called read the air, right? So you won't get a direct response from the Japanese, but Canada, US, Germany are low context cultures in that they state what they want to say, right? So when we think about it from how that helps us from a globalization standpoint, it's how do we actually build training curriculums? How do we interact with pilots? How do we use things like biometrics, right? So for example, biometrics with pilots will actually show stress levels. And stress levels will tell us which pilots are actually ready for the next stage, as opposed to using implicit bias, right? Like a person is a certain profile of a pilot, that doesn't matter, right? So those are some of the things. Okay. Anything to add? Good. Okay,
Perfect.
all right. Is there a difference between inclusion and diversity? I think it's for this side. Mm-hmm. Okay. What's your perspective on inclusion versus diversity?
So there's a difference between diversity and inclusion. Diversity refers to the presence, the representation of differing characteristics, of experiences, of backgrounds. And inclusion focuses mostly on creating that environment that supports diversity, that empowers individualism, and also really allowing individuals to provide their unique perspectives in a respective manner.
Yeah, so if I can piggyback a bit about what Marissa said in terms of creating that environment. So what I do personally when I try to hire folks in my team or in other teams, I ask for our HR recruiting department to remove the names, remove the locations. And essentially what I do is I look at the CV and I base myself on the different competencies that I'm looking for, the different keywords as well. And then I say, okay, there's, ChatGPT we're talking about, they get really great surveys, all the right words, and then I take a few of the ones that didn't use ChatGPT and don't have all the great words. And essentially that's how I base my inclusivity. And then through being inclusive, there is diversity in competence. And so that's how I kind of create that environment for my team and for CAE as well.
Anything to add, or?
No, I think Gina and Marissa said it all. I think, when you think about inclusivity is really how you can make an individual belong based on whatever the competence, their age, their background, and make the team as productive and as effective as possible. For me, that's what resonates to me when I think about inclusion.
So there's one easy way to apply inclusivity, I guess if that's a word, in your personal lives. It's one of the things that we would train from a diversity standpoint is seek out people who are most different from yourself. So you go into a room, seek them out and get to know them, and you'll probably learn a lot about that. And it's also not just visible diversity, it's also the way people communicate, right? What we found is the ones that tend to be outgoing, confident, et cetera, will capture the airtime. But the people who have the most value usually are quiet, and they won't say much, and they'll only answer if they have something valuable to say, and there's most to learn from them. So that also is being inclusive in general. Does that make sense, or? Yeah? All right, okay. We should have solicited feedback or comments from you as we go. So if you want to ask any questions, it's a small room, so if you want to ask any questions as we go along, please do, right? So, okay, I'm trying out the inclusive thing, so. Okay, so. All right, implicit bias. This is something there's a lot of interesting psychological things in this, but let's pose it to the question to the team. I think it's your turn.
Yeah, I think it's my turn.
View on implicit bias, okay.
All right, so.
Maybe before we answer, do you want to define what implicit bias
everybody.
is?
Well, I don't know what the actual, do you
Well,
want to take a stab
basically,
at this?
yeah, I can establish a little bit of context. Basically, implicit bias is really like don't judge a book by the cover. When you see someone walking into the room, you have to give them the opportunity to show who they really are. Basically, that's it. And if when you have implicit bias, it could affect your judgment, your behavior, and that's how unconsciously. People usually react when they meet someone for the first time. For me, that topic really brings me to trust. And the reason is I try to make sure that I provide the trust into either my team or the people that has to conduct the work at CAE or any other organization to make sure that I don't unconsciously judge them or create that bias that could be detrimental to a great relationship. Because sometimes you meet someone for the first time, and it wasn't like you didn't get it off like right away, but after a few iterations, you can discover more about that person, their abilities, their competencies. They might have a different opinion, might have a different way of working than you, be more direct where you're more passive, but either way, give them a chance, trust them, and then work with them. For me, that's really what comes across when I think about it.
Thanks, Jade.
Yeah, and like to build off of that, you don't know what kind of day maybe that person is having, right? You don't know what experience they just had, and they're bringing that forward in your conversation with them. So
Yeah, so I am actually the opposite. I talk too much. Everybody tells me all the time, but I'm fine with it. No, but essentially a bit of the bias is like, if we're talking about me experiencing, well, first of all, I'm a 6'4" lady, so when I walk into a room, I grab a lot of the attention, so I kind of like just ran with it. I used to be a hermit, to be honest, but I cannot go under the radar, so I kind of had to upscale my game there. And the other portion of it is, like, I'm not a technical person. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a technician. So what I had to do a lot in IT per se is break down the barrier and find my space in it. What's my value as a person? Being more into operational efficiency, being a bit more into leadership. And Mark, you were talking about how in the past 10, 15 years, the IT environment itself changed from a very technical driven environment to a more of a mix, right? Soft skills, technical, and things like that. So where I add value and where I have to sell myself as well is by not being a technical person, what do I bring to the scale? Well, I bring Linda from payroll, and how do you talk to Linda from payroll? I am Linda from payroll. So if I need to learn how to use things, if I need to go to market with products and things like that, I bring that user experience side to IT, which a lot of technicians that are very technical are missing in general. And so I had to kind of find my space, and I was happy I could make it at CAE. They're very supportive in that. So that's kind of how I dealt with it mostly, being in IT.
Thanks, Gina.
Did you ever experience that yourselves?
I mean, I've worked in different groups, and I feel like the biases that I've experienced is very different from one to another. My previous group was mostly older males, and I noticed that the women took on a lot of that emotional labor. So remembering birthdays, for example, like very simple. But for some reason, it was always upon the women in the group to remember birthdays and to do something about the birthdays. And it's sort of, you know, we have our day-to-day work to do too, and adding that to the load is sort of, okay, something that we tried to discuss. But it's so different versus working with an all-female group that I work with now. It's that emotional labor is shared, and it's nice to be able to share that labor as well. And yeah, I guess that's my addition.
Of course.
Project. So I think it's very important for me to not obsess over fitting into a stereotyped mold. It's important for me to acknowledge and accept my introverted qualities, and see how it can benefit me. So maybe I'm not necessarily enthusiastic, but I'm someone who's a good listener, who's a reflective thinker, and this can bring some depth and focus into my leadership approaches. Yeah.
I have a lot of perspective on biases, but I'll share two things. But before I get into that, how many people have experienced biases that have prevented you from being your best? I would say most everyone here, right? So one thing, one thing I would share with you as you go into the corporate world, even in Canada, is to look at companies that look at diversity not as an ESG score in general, because in the time that I've been in consulting, there are companies that do a lot of that as tokenization, right? In general, right? Because the challenge is that you won't be your best by doing that in general, right? I've had situations where people said, put that person in that role because X, Y, and Z is this kind of person, right? In general. So ask the questions, why are you recruiting me? What attributes do you appreciate? Because it'll help you thrive. Because what will happen that I've seen is that if a company truly appreciates the individual based on diversity of thought, contribution to business, et cetera, they will empower you. They will make sure that you have the right access to leaders, you will have the right footprint, you will get resources, you get funding, all those kinds of things, right? Does that make sense in general? So the other thing, at the beginning we talked about being in Canada. So I've traveled all the world. I'm sure all of you, most of you have as well. I would say we're pretty fortunate to be here because generally I would say as a whole, my experience, love to get your thoughts, is I got a fair shot here. You know, my family is originally from India, and people don't get a fair shot there. You know, if you're from the north or if you're south, you don't get a fair shot, depending on where you are, right? In general. So that's been my unique experience, right? Anybody want to add anything or? Oh, okay, let's move on, right? Okay, I think we're gonna move to this. Tips, I think, because we're running out of time. So what's your suggestion to the group? And then we'll open up for questions and just have a discussion in general. If you were to give 3 tips to the audience starting their career, what would you suggest, Miriam?
Okay, soft skills are not underrated. They're very important. I would say that they're like 85 to 90% of your job is communicating well, being clear, being able to negotiate, being able to delegate, being able to have good leadership skills, interpersonal skills. I think those are so important, and it creates, I think, like a nice environment, a nice team to work with as well. And yes, cyber is very technical, but those soft skills are very, very important. That's my tip 1. I think being comfortable with being uncomfortable is another tip. That's something that's going to help you grow. Doing something that's routine or predictable won't help with that. And then my final tip would be nothing goes as planned. So you might have something mapped out, your career's all mapped out. From my own experience, even when I reached my dream job at CBC, it didn't go as planned. And I'm okay with it. I'm at peace. I think that life is a journey, and so is your career. And I think being open to that is going to be very helpful to you as well.
Good.
Jen?
All right. So I'll pick up a little bit on that as well. I think patience. You know, some of you are starting your career, so really being patient, being eager to learn. You're going to learn from different people, senior, younger. So that's one of the skills that helped me throughout my career as well. Being resilient. As you said, nothing ever happened the way you intended it, but you go with intention. You don't just go with the flow. You go with intent. You know, where do I want to be? What do I don't like? Sometimes you don't know what you like, but you know what you don't like, and then you go with the intention of, okay, I will wake up in the morning, and that's what I want to do. So if you base yourself on your timing, you know, patience will lead you in opportunities that you haven't foreseen. You're able to learn through different people. You don't assume that you know everything. That was something that helped me grow a lot. And then remaining resilient throughout your career.
Gina? She has a lot to say, by the way, so.
Yeah, so well, I was actually thinking, what can I say after this? Because they took it all.
Oh
But,
my God.
essentially, one of the biggest thing, and that's my thing, is enjoy yourself so that others can enjoy working with you. So being successful is not always about how hard you work, but it's how you impact yourself and you impact your environment. So, for example, me in my leadership role, one of the things that I want to make sure is whoever I'm with, you know, from a VP to a concierge to whoever it is, that they're actually enjoying the journey so that they have a positive outcome. So that would be my main tip, would be to enjoy yourselves in the process and be open to whatever's going to come. I started in finance. I did not think I would end up here. But, you know, enjoy the journey a bit as well. Take the opportunities where they lay and grab the bulls by the horn. You might not have all the skill set. It doesn't matter. You'll develop them as you learn in that role. So that's a bit what I have to say about that.
Marissa? Oh, sorry.
So I'll take a cybersecurity spin for this. For those who are starting their careers in cybersecurity, I would, one of the tips is that it's a rapidly evolving industry. So it's very important to continuously learn, to be updated on the latest trends, on the latest technologies, the latest best practices. Another thing is to build your professional network, and this is a tip that Mark gave me. So we cannot be experts in every domain of cybersecurity. So for that reason, it's really, really important that you build your network. You have people of different expertises surrounding you who you can refer to later on in your career. And the last tip that I would give is really to gain as much practical experience as you can. So whether it be participating in workshops or connecting with professionals in the field or doing classes, really try to get as much experience as you can.
So I'll share the last, and then we'll open up for questions. So I'll first talk about finding the right role that's future-proof in cyber first. Any of you have heard about what GPT-5 is going to do for the industry? Right? So it's going to bring in visual aids. It's going to be able to have voice recognition, a bunch of other things, right? I'm at sort of the last quartile of my career, but for a lot of you at the beginning of your journey, AI is going to change the dynamics of cyber. Cyber used to be about expertise and knowledge. Those kinds of roles are going to go away in general. I would say if you were to future-proof yourself in cyber, be more on the generative AI, how to secure, how to build trust, all those kinds of things, and modernize around those areas in general, right? Anything that deals with expertise, the person knowing everything about everything is going to be gone soon in general. So in terms of bias, and three things I would say when you're looking for your next enterprise that you want to be part of is passion, value, and authenticity. So passion, we talked about it. Find something that you truly love, and you'll succeed. I've seen this over and over again. I'm sure, Prashant, you've seen this over and over again. The people who hate what they do are not going to succeed in general. Value, it's very difficult to, so remember, it's who you work for, right, in general, and whether that person's going to be a good champion for you, a steward for you and your success, et cetera. Assess them by their values. How do they treat others? How do they feel about their team? Look for red flags in that conversation in general, right? Because what I found is that if the values aligned, you'll have a good career in general. And authenticity. Remember the phrase, the brighter the image, the darker the negative, general? So people who overcompensate in a diversity standpoint will go on the other way, right? The ones that are authentic and will hold people accountable are the ones that you want to align with, because they will actually bring the best. They'll be tough on you when it calls for the person to be tough on you, and they'll be your biggest supporter when you do a great job. Seek out those people. So that would be my guidance. So I think we have probably 2 minutes or so. 3 minutes, great. Any questions, thoughts? I mean, your point of view. I mean, this is a safe space. And, I'd love to hear your thoughts or perspectives. Yes?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. My name is Jody Williams. I just want to find out, for those of you on the panel who consider yourself to be introverts, what are some steps that you've taken throughout your career to navigate your career and to take your career to the next steps, being a leader as you are today?
Okay.
And I was looking right at Marissa when you said that.
You want to go, Marissa? Oh, you don't have your mic.
Oh,
Okay, I'll go until. Thank you for the question. Well, basically, what I have done throughout my career is put myself out there. I think that's one of the things that helped me the most. I was shy to talk in front of people. I start talking in front of people all the time. I was just like, okay, I'll do that presentation. I'll do the workshop. I raise my hand a lot of times. So that helped me being more visible, where I felt that wasn't visible. So that's one of the, I think, key tips that I could provide to you is put yourself out there. Go show the world your best side, you know, and your abilities, and then go for it.
You know what? Start small. Start adding everybody you can see on LinkedIn, and it'll give you the confidence eventually to walk up to them and shake their hands. I know it sounds a bit weird, but add them. It doesn't matter if they say yes, doesn't matter if they say no, you'll build confidence by going towards them. And it's virtual. What's the worst that's gonna happen? They're not gonna accept it. So I would say start with the small stuff and then gain that confidence to get to the bigger ones. And it creates your network. So.
We got the wrap up thing, so I'll maybe give my own experience. Thank you, Marissa, my own experience. So I'm an introvert as well. And I think most people, so from my perspective, my journey is, I'm an introvert because I don't know how to start the conversation. I know we have to wrap up. Just real quick, I assume yourself as well? Oh, you told me to use a mic. Okay, all right, that's good. So how to start the conversation, how to connect with someone, right? What's the easiest way to connect with someone?
I think it's
Smile. Ask them about themselves. That's the easiest way to open up a conversation in general. That's what I try to do all the time, so. Okay, I guess we have to wrap up, right? So thank you so much. I appreciate it. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.